Welcome to The Buried Ledger. Before we begin, I need you to understand something about sound. When a rifle fires, the explosion reaches 140 to 190 decibels, loud enough to be heard for miles, loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage, loud enough to alert everyone within 1,000 yards that a weapon has been discharged. The sound is a warning system. It tells the world that violence is happening. Now, imagine you're an enslaved man who just figured out how to eliminate that sound, how to make a rifle whisper instead of roar, how to kill in complete silence. And imagine you wanted to share this invention with your master, wanted recognition for your genius, wanted to contribute something valuable to the world. But then they raped your wife, and when you begged for justice, they laughed, and you realized your invention wasn't meant to be a gift, it was meant to be a weapon. This is the story of Samuel, the man who invented the suppressor 60 years before it was officially patented, the enslaved genius who spent 10 years perfecting silent death, the husband who used his creation to kill 15 men in complete silence. Hit that like button and let me tell you about the most revolutionary murder weapon in American history. August 1844, Thornwood Plantation, North Carolina. Samuel was 23 years old when he first understood the physics of sound suppression. He'd been working as a gunsmith's assistant for 7 years, repairing rifles and muskets for Master William Thornwood and neighboring plantation owners. Samuel had a natural gift for mechanics, for understanding how things worked, for seeing solutions that others missed. He was cleaning a rifle one afternoon when he noticed how the barrel's rifling created specific sound patterns, noticed how different barrel lengths produced different acoustic signatures, noticed how the expanding gases from the gunpowder explosion were what created most of the noise. And he thought, what if you could capture those gases, slow their expansion, diffuse the sound before it escaped? It was a theoretical question, just curiosity, just the kind of mental puzzle that Samuel enjoyed working through while he performed the monotonous task of cleaning weapons. He mentioned it casually to Thomas, the white gunsmith who supervised him. "I've been thinking about how to make rifles quieter. Seems like if you could slow down the gas expansion." Thomas cut him off. "Don't be stupid. Can't make a rifle quiet. That's the whole point. Noise scares game, signals other hunters, announces your presence. Why would anyone want a quiet rifle?" Samuel didn't argue, but he kept thinking about it. Over the next weeks, he started experimenting in secret. Small tests, nothing that would be noticed. He drilled tiny holes in scrap metal, tested different chamber sizes, observed how gases expanded through various configurations. He learned that baffles, small metal plates with holes, could redirect gases and slow their escape. Learned that expansion chambers gave gases room to cool and lose pressure before exiting. Learned that spiral patterns created turbulence that further dissipated sound. By 1845, 1 year into his private research, Samuel had built a crude prototype, a metal cylinder that attached to a rifle barrel, filled with a series of baffles and chambers. He tested it late one night in the woods, far from the plantation, shooting into a dirt bank. The results were remarkable. The rifle's explosive crack became a harsh cough, still audible, but dramatically quieter, maybe 30 to 40 decibel reduction, enough that someone 100 yards away might not hear it at all. Samuel was 24 years old, and he just invented something that didn't exist anywhere in the world, the suppressor, the silencer, a device that would eventually revolutionize warfare, hunting, and assassination.
But in 1845, he was enslaved, owned property, and any invention he created legally belonged to his master. Samuel understood this, wasn't bothered by it initially. He thought that if he perfected the device and presented it to Master Thornwood, he might be rewarded, might be given special privileges, might even be granted freedom in exchange for such a valuable invention. So he continued his work in secret, stealing time, using scrap materials, conducting tests in remote locations where no one would hear. By 1854, at age 33, Samuel had created a suppressor that reduced rifle noise by 70 to 80 decibels. A rifle that normally fired at 165 decibels would fire at 85 to 90 with his device attached. Quieter than a lawnmower. Quiet enough that the mechanical action of the rifle was louder than the shot itself. It was a masterpiece of engineering. 19 baffles arranged in a specific pattern, 3 expansion chambers of calculated volumes, a spiral pathway that created maximum turbulence, threading that allowed it to attach securely to standard rifle barrels. Samuel had never seen a patent, never studied advanced physics, never had formal education beyond what he taught himself, but he'd created something that wouldn't be officially invented until 1902, when Hiram Percy Maxim would patent the Maxim silencer and become famous for the exact same principle Samuel had discovered 58 years earlier. In April 1854, Samuel decided it was time to present his invention to Master Thornwood, time to show what he'd accomplished, time to see if genius could create freedom. He prepared a demonstration, cleaned his best prototype, selected a reliable rifle, planned his presentation carefully. He would show Thornwood the device, explain how it worked, demonstrate its effectiveness, and propose its potential applications: hunting without scaring other game, military advantages, even just reducing noise for neighbors during target practice. He scheduled the demonstration for May 15, 1854. Thornwood agreed to see it, mildly curious about what his gunsmith slave had been working on. But on May 12, 3 days before the scheduled demonstration, everything changed. Rachel was walking back from the fields that evening. The sun was setting. The day's work was done. She was heading to their cabin, where Samuel would be waiting with whatever simple dinner they could manage. James Crawford, one of Thornwood's overseers, saw her walking alone. Crawford was 38, brutal, known for violence against enslaved people. He'd been drinking. He grabbed Rachel off the path, dragged her into the tobacco barn, raped her while she screamed for help that didn't come. Another enslaved woman heard the screaming, ran to find Samuel, found him in the gunsmith shop, told him what was happening. Samuel ran to the tobacco barn, got there just as Crawford was adjusting his clothes, Rachel sobbing on the ground, her dress torn, blood on her legs. Samuel's vision went red. He lunged at Crawford, got his hands around the overseer's throat, fully intending to kill him. Crawford was bigger, stronger, had the advantage of surprise recovery. He threw Samuel off, drew his pistol, aimed it at Samuel's head. "Try that again, boy, and I'll shoot you dead." Completely legal. You attacked a white man. Samuel stood there, shaking with rage, completely helpless. Rachel was behind him, sobbing. Crawford was in front of him, gun drawn, smiling. "Your wife's a pretty thing. Might visit her sometime." He walked away, left Samuel and Rachel in the tobacco barn, destroyed. Samuel helped Rachel back to their cabin, cleaned her wounds as best he could, held her while she cried, felt something inside himself break and reform into something harder. The next morning, Samuel went to Master Thornwood, explained what had happened, begged for justice, for punishment, for acknowledgement that what Crawford had done was wrong. Thornwood listened with mild annoyance. "Crawford says she was willing, says she propositioned him. That's a lie. She was screaming. Other people heard." Other slaves heard. Their testimony doesn't count. It's your word and your wife's word against an overseer's. I'm not going to punish a valuable overseer because a slave claims something happened. Master Thornwood, please. I've worked for you faithfully for 15 years. I've never caused trouble. I'm asking for justice. Just acknowledge what he did was wrong. Thornwood's expression hardened. What he did, if anything happened at all, is his business. You don't get to demand justice, Samuel. You're property. Your wife is property. What happens to you is my concern, not yours. Now get back to work. Samuel stood there in Thornwood's study, feeling the last remnants of his hope die. He thought genius might create opportunities, thought excellence might earn respect, thought that if he just worked hard enough, was smart enough, contributed enough, maybe things might be different. But they weren't different. They never would be. He was property. Rachel was property, and property didn't get justice when violated by its owners.
Samuel left Thornwood's study and walked directly to the gunsmith shop, pulled out his perfected suppressor, the device he'd spent 10 years creating, the invention he'd planned to present in 3 days as a gift, as proof of his value, as a bid for recognition. He looked at it with completely different eyes. Now, this wasn't a gift. This was a weapon. This was the ability to kill in complete silence. This was power, and he knew exactly how he was going to use it. Samuel spent the next 2 days planning, not frantically, not emotionally, with the same careful precision he'd used to design the suppressor. First, he needed a rifle. He selected one from the shop's inventory. A .40 caliber rifle, accurate at 200 yards, in excellent condition. He cleaned it meticulously, test-fired it to verify accuracy, fitted his suppressor perfectly. Second, he needed ammunition. He had access to the shop's supply, took enough for 20 shots, though he only planned to use 15. Third, he needed targets. He created a list in his mind. 1. James Crawford, the overseer who raped Rachel. 2 to 5, the 4 other overseers who'd been present when Crawford bragged about it afterward and laughed. 6, Master William Thornwood, who'd refused justice. 7 to 8, Thornwood's 2 adult sons, Richard and Thomas, who'd participated in denying Rachel's claims. 9 to 11, 3 neighboring plantation owners who Thornwood consulted with about the incident and who'd all agreed that enslaved women couldn't be raped because they were property. 12 to 15, 4 slave catchers who worked the area and who'd been brought in to investigate and had instead terrorized the enslaved community. Into silence, 15 men, all complicit in what had happened to Rachel, all part of the system that made such violence legal and consequence-free. Samuel planned each shot carefully, studied their routines, learned when they were alone, when they were vulnerable, where he could position himself for clean shots. He tested his suppressor one final time in the deep woods, firing into dirt. The sound was a quiet cough, barely louder than a heavy book dropping on a table. From 20 yards away, it would be nearly inaudible. From 50 yards, completely silent. Perfect. But before the night of revenge, Samuel needed to understand exactly what he'd created, needed to document it in his mind, since he could never write it down, needed to know that when the moment came, the weapon wouldn't fail. The suppressor Samuel had built measured 11 inches long, 2 inches in diameter, weighed approximately 2 pounds, made from salvaged steel that Samuel had carefully worked over years, using tools from the gunsmith shop after hours when Thomas had gone home. The internal structure was what made it revolutionary. The first chamber captured the initial explosive gas expansion. As the rifle fired and gases rushed forward, they hit the first baffle, a metal disc with a hole slightly larger than the bullet diameter. The gases couldn't expand fully because the baffle forced them through a narrow opening.
Behind the first baffle was a small expansion chamber. The gases that made it through spread out in this space, losing pressure and velocity. Then they hit the second baffle, which forced them through another narrow opening. This pattern repeated 19 times: baffle, chamber, baffle, chamber, each cycle reducing the gas pressure, slowing the expansion, cooling the temperature. By the time the gases reached the final chamber and exited the suppressor, they were moving at a fraction of their original speed, had lost most of their heat, and emerged with minimal acoustic signature. The spiral groove Samuel had carved on the inside of the cylinder created turbulence in the gas flow. Instead of rushing straight through, the gases swirled, colliding with themselves, further dissipating energy. The threading Samuel had machined allowed the suppressor to attach securely to any standard rifle barrel. It took 3 full rotations to tighten completely, creating a seal that prevented gases from escaping at the attachment point. Samuel tested the weight distribution. The suppressor added front-heavy balance to the rifle, but he'd accounted for this by slightly modifying the stock to compensate. The rifle remained accurate at 200 yards, even with the additional weight. He tested different ammunition types, found that standard black powder loads worked well. Reduced powder loads worked even better, quieter, but sacrificed some range and stopping power. For the revenge killings, Samuel chose full power loads. He wasn't concerned about noise once the shots started. He'd be moving location constantly, and he wanted to ensure lethal hits. A wounded target could raise alarm. Dead men stayed silent. Samuel also calculated the risks. 15 targets over approximately 4 hours, averaged 20 minutes per kill, including travel time between locations, meant he needed to maintain perfect operational security for 4 hours straight in the middle of the night. One mistake would be fatal. If anyone heard a shot, saw him, caught him in possession of the rifle, he'd be killed immediately, probably tortured first to force confession about accomplices. But Samuel wasn't afraid. The cold rage that had settled into him after Rachel's rape had burned away fear, left only purpose, only calculation, only the determination to make every single person who participated in or enabled that violence pay the ultimate price. On the night of May 17th, 1854, Samuel left his cabin at midnight. Rachel was asleep. He'd given her laudanum to help her rest. She didn't know what he was planning. He carried his rifle with the suppressor attached, wrapped in cloth to hide it, moved through the darkness like a ghost. Years of moving quietly through the plantation gave him perfect knowledge of every path, every guard's routine, every blind spot. His first target was James Crawford, the overseer who raped Rachel. The overseer slept in a small house near the main plantation buildings. Samuel had studied Crawford's routines for 2 days, knew he slept heavily, often drunk, rarely waking during the night. Samuel positioned himself 30 yards away behind a tool shed with clear line of sight through Crawford's bedroom window. The window was open. May nights in North Carolina were warm, and Crawford liked the breeze. Samuel could see Crawford's sleeping form clearly in the moonlight. The overseer lay on his back, snoring softly, completely vulnerable. Samuel settled into position, rested the rifle on the edge of the tool shed for stability, controlled his breathing, let his heartbeat slow, aimed carefully at Crawford's chest. This was the man who'd raped Rachel, who'd laughed afterward, who'd drawn a gun on Samuel and called it legal. Samuel felt no hesitation, no moral conflict, just cold satisfaction that justice was finally coming. He squeezed the trigger slowly, smoothly, the way he'd practiced thousands of times. The rifle coughed quietly. The sound was barely louder than a whisper, immediately absorbed by the night air. The suppressor worked exactly as designed. Through the window, Samuel saw Crawford jerk once. The .40 caliber ball had entered his chest, probably pierced his heart or aorta. Crawford made a small gasping sound, then went completely still. Dead in seconds. No alarm raised, no scream, just silent death, delivered from 30 yards away. Samuel stayed in position for 3 full minutes, watched to confirm Crawford wasn't moving, watched to ensure no lights came on in nearby buildings, watched to make sure the sound hadn't alerted anyone. Nothing. Complete silence. The plantation slept on, unaware that murder had just occurred. Samuel moved to his next position. The other 4 overseers who'd laughed about Rachel's rape all slept in a bunkhouse together. It was a larger structure, about 40 feet long, with 4 bunks visible through the windows. Samuel positioned himself behind a water trough, 80 yards away, with elevated angle from a slight hill. The distance was longer than ideal, but necessary to avoid being seen if anyone looked out the window. Through the bunkhouse window, he could see all 4 bunks, 3 men sleeping peacefully. The 4th was shifting restlessly, not fully asleep yet. Samuel waited.
Patience was crucial. If he shot while the 4th man was awake, even a suppressed shot might startle him into calling out. 20 minutes passed. The 4th man finally settled into deep sleep, his breathing becoming regular and heavy. Samuel took aim at the first overseer, a man named Peters, who'd been present when Crawford bragged about raping Rachel and laughed, saying, "That's what they're for." The distance was challenging, 80 yards with iron sights and moonlight. But Samuel had practiced at this distance, knew his rifle, knew how to compensate for bullet drop. He aimed for center mass, squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot whispered into the night. Through the window, Samuel saw Peters jerk slightly, then go still. A hit, probably fatal. But at this distance, Samuel couldn't be completely certain the death was instant. He waited, watched. Peters didn't move again. The other 3 sleepers didn't stir. 3 minutes passed. Samuel confirmed Peters was dead or dying, moved his aim to the 2nd overseer. This one was named Carson, had been at the bunkhouse when Crawford described the rape in detail, had asked if Crawford planned to visit her again. Carson died without waking, clean shot through the chest. The 3rd overseer was Williams, had suggested that Samuel should be taught a lesson for complaining about Crawford's actions. Williams' lead arrived at 900 feet per second, delivered silently through his window. The 4th overseer, Morrison, had actually suggested whipping Samuel for making false accusations, had told Thornwood that enslaved people needed to understand their place. Morrison stirred in his sleep just as Samuel was lining up the shot. The man's eyes opened slightly, looking around the dark bunkhouse with confusion, probably some instinct telling him something was wrong. Samuel didn't hesitate, took the shot while Morrison was sitting up. The bullet caught Morrison in the chest. He slumped back down into his bunk, dead or dying, never having fully woken, never understanding what had killed him. 4 overseers dead in the same room, 5 shots fired, 0 noise that carried beyond the bunkhouse. The plantation continued sleeping peacefully. Samuel moved on to the main house. This required more care. Master Thornwood slept in a bedroom on the 2nd floor, which meant Samuel couldn't get a clear shot from ground level without being dangerously close to other buildings. The solution was a large oak tree that stood 30 yards from the house. Samuel had identified it during his planning phase. The tree had thick branches extending toward the mansion, providing perfect cover and angle. He climbed silently, years of plantation work having made him comfortable with heights and climbing. Positioned himself on a thick branch about 20 feet up, with perfect line of sight through Thornwood's 2nd-floor bedroom window. The window was partially open. Samuel could see Thornwood sleeping in his large bed, alone. His wife had died years earlier.
The plantation owner slept peacefully, completely unaware that his gunsmith slave had become the instrument of his death. Samuel climbed down from the tree, moved carefully through the mansion grounds to the guest wing. Thornwood's 2 adult sons, Richard and Thomas Jr., were staying in separate rooms during their visit. Richard slept in the east guest room, ground floor, window facing the gardens, easy shot. Samuel positioned himself 40 yards away, behind a decorative shrub, took aim through the open window. Richard was 28 years old, worked as an overseer on a neighboring plantation, had been present when Samuel begged for justice after Rachel's rape, had laughed when his father dismissed the complaint, had said, "Can't rape property, P. That's like saying you stole from yourself." Richard died with that logic, killed by property that refused to accept being owned. Thomas Jr. slept in the west guest room, also ground floor, also window accessible. Samuel circled the house quietly, found his position, and looked through the window at Thomas Jr. sleeping. Thomas was 26, managed a portion of his father's plantation, had been even more dismissive than Richard, had suggested that Samuel should be sold away as punishment for making accusations, had told his father that keeping married couples together made slaves uppity and entitled to things they shouldn't expect. Thomas Jr.'s expectations ended permanently with a .40 caliber ball through his chest. 8 men dead, 8 shots fired, the Thornwood plantation slept on, completely unaware that its entire power structure had just been systematically executed. Samuel left the main house and moved through the woods toward neighboring properties. He had 7 more targets. The night was only half over. The first neighboring plantation owner was named Edmund Burke, lived alone in a small manor house 2 miles east. Burke had been consulted by Thornwood about the Rachel situation, had advised that Crawford shouldn't be punished because discipline breaks down if overseers face consequences for their actions with slave women. Samuel found Burke in his study, sleeping in a leather chair over paperwork. The man probably had been drinking. A half-empty whiskey bottle sat on his desk, shot through the study window from 20 yards. Burke slumped forward onto his papers, bleeding onto the documents he'd been reviewing, dead before the whiskey could wear off. The second plantation owner was Charles Hampton, lived with his family 4 miles south. Larger property required more careful approach. Hampton had told Thornwood that acknowledging slave rape as a crime would create legal complications we don't need, had said the solution was to keep them separate and remind Samuel who's in charge. Samuel positioned himself in Hampton's garden behind a decorative wall 40 yards from the master bedroom window. He could see Hampton and his wife sleeping together in their bed. Samuel felt a moment of hesitation. He'd planned to kill Hampton, but he hadn't considered that the man's wife would be right there. If she woke, if she screamed, the entire plan could collapse. But he'd come this far. Hampton was guilty. Hampton's advice had directly contributed to Crawford's lack of punishment. Samuel aimed carefully, taking extra time to ensure the angle would send the bullet through Hampton's side of the bed only, didn't want to hit the wife. Hampton jerked once and went still. His wife continued sleeping peacefully beside him, unaware that his husband had just been murdered in bed next to her. Samuel left quickly before she could wake and discover the body. The third plantation owner was named Michael Patterson, lived 3 miles west in a modest home. Patterson's advice to Thornwood had been the most callous. Just get rid of them both, sell the husband, sell the wife, problem solved, and you recoup the value. Samuel found Patterson in his bedroom, aimed through the window.
Patterson died, his problem solved permanently. 11 men dead, 11 shots fired. Complete silence maintained throughout. The county slept on, unaware that a systematic execution was underway across multiple properties. The final 4 targets were the slave catchers. They operated as a team.
living in a cabin near the county road where they could respond quickly to runaway reports. Samuel knew their names: Samuel Miller, Jacob Crawford, James, his cousin, Marcus Webb, and Daniel Brown. All four had been brought in to investigate Rachel's rape. They'd interrogated enslaved people on Thornwood Plantation, using violence and threats to force people to say the rape never happened or that Rachel had been willing. Samuel approached the cabin at 4 a.m. The sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. He needed to finish quickly. The cabin was small, just one room with 4 bunks. All 4 slave catchers were there, sleeping after a night of drinking. Empty bottles littered the floor. Samuel positioned himself 40 yards away, behind a fallen log, with clear view through the cabin's single window. He could see all 4 bunks. This was the most dangerous part of the entire night. 4 targets in the same small room. If any one of them woke and screamed, the others might wake before Samuel could kill them all. He took aim at Jacob Miller first. Miller slept nearest the window, easiest shot. Miller died instantly, the bullet entering his chest as he slept on his side. Wait 3 minutes, let the body settle, confirm the others are still sleeping. Second target, Seth Crawford, James Crawford's cousin, probably the most enthusiastic about terrorizing the enslaved community during the investigation. Seth joined his cousin in death. Third target, Marcus Webb, larger man, slept on his back, snoring heavily. Webb's snoring stopped permanently. The fourth target, Daniel Brown, stirred. Samuel's previous shot, even suppressed, it created some small sound, maybe the bullet hitting bone, maybe Brown's subconscious registering something wrong. Brown's eyes opened. He sat up in his bunk, looking around the dark cabin with confusion, saw the bodies of his 3 companions in the pre-dawn light. He opened his mouth to scream. Samuel's final shot hit him through the throat before any sound could emerge. Brown clutched at his neck, blood pouring through his fingers, trying desperately to call for help with a destroyed larynx. He collapsed back onto his bunk and died in silence, unable to make the scream that might have saved him. 15 men dead, 15 shots fired, complete silence throughout the entire night. Samuel stood in the woods near the slave catcher's cabin, holding his rifle with its revolutionary suppressor, surrounded by the evidence of what he'd accomplished. He'd killed 15 men in approximately 4 hours, traveled across multiple properties, fired from various distances and angles, maintained perfect operational security. 0 alarms raised, 0 witnesses, 0 noise that carried beyond the immediate vicinity of each killing. His invention had worked flawlessly. The suppressor had performed exactly as designed, reducing rifle reports to quiet coughs that didn't carry, that didn't alert anyone, that allowed death to arrive in complete silence. Samuel felt no guilt, no remorse, just cold satisfaction that Rachel had been avenged, that every single man who'd participated in or enabled her rape, who'd laughed about it, who'd denied justice, who'd threatened to repeat the violence, was now dead. The system said he couldn't have justice, so he'd created his own justice, using genius the system couldn't comprehend, wielding technology that wouldn't officially exist for another 48 years, executing a revenge campaign that the white community would never understand. He walked back to Thornwood Plantation as dawn was breaking. Disassembled his rifle and suppressor with the same careful precision he'd built them, hid the pieces in different locations throughout the gunsmith's shop, cleaned his hands thoroughly, burning the rags afterward, changed his clothes, burning those too, removed every trace of gunpowder residue from his skin, Then he went to his cabin and lay down beside Rachel, who was still sleeping peacefully from the laudanum, unaware that her husband had just killed 15 men to avenge her. The bodies were discovered over the next hours as the plantation awoke. A house slave found Crawford's body when she came to clean his room at dawn. Her screams alerted others. The bunkhouse overseers' bodies were discovered when they didn't report for morning duties. Someone went to wake them and found 4 corpses. Master Thornwood's body was discovered by a house servant bringing breakfast. The servant's scream when seeing Thornwood dead in bed woke the entire main house. Richard and Thomas Jr.'s bodies were found shortly after, when family members went to tell them about their father's death. By mid-morning, riders were returning from neighboring plantations with news. More bodies, plantation owners dead, slave catchers dead, all killed the same way, rifle shots during the night. The white community erupted into complete panic. 15 white men dead in a single night, all from gunshot wounds, all killed while sleeping or unaware. And nobody had heard anything. Not a single person on any of the affected properties or nearby areas had reported hearing gunshots. It was impossible. Rifles in 1854 could be heard for miles. A single shot would wake everyone nearby. 15 shots should have created chaos, alarms, brought people running, but there had been silence, complete, total, inexplicable silence. The investigation began immediately. County sheriff, neighboring law enforcement, even military personnel from nearby Fort Morne were brought in. They examined crime scenes, interviewed everyone, searched for weapons, demanded explanations. The doctors examining the bodies confirmed, all killed by .40 caliber rifle balls, all shots fired from various distances, some close range, 20 yard, some farther, 80 yard, all accurate lethal shots. Whoever did this was an excellent marksman.
But the mystery that baffled everyone was the silence. How could someone fire 15 rifle shots without being heard? The prevailing theories emerged quickly. Theory 1, multiple killers. Maybe 15 different people killed 15 targets simultaneously, explaining why no pattern of movement could be detected. But this required impossible coordination. How would 15 enslaved people or conspirators organize such a complex operation without anyone finding out? Theory 2, extreme distance shots. Maybe the killer fired from so far away that the sound didn't carry to anyone who'd remember it. But the wound pattern showed close and medium-range shots, not distance sniping. Theory 3, natural sound masking. Maybe thunderstorms or other noise covered the gunshots. But May 17, 1854 had been a clear, quiet night. No storms, no wind, no natural noise. Theory 4, supernatural forces. Some people seriously proposed that the killings were carried out by ghosts or demons, explaining the impossible silence. This theory gained surprising traction among the more religious community members. Theory 5, a new silent weapon. One investigator, a former military officer named Captain Morris, proposed that someone might have invented a way to make rifles silent. He was dismissed immediately. The consensus was that making rifles silent was physically impossible, and even if it weren't, no enslaved person could have the knowledge to create such technology. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Every enslaved person on Thornwood Plantation and neighboring properties was questioned. Many were beaten to force confessions. Several were tortured when investigators suspected they were withholding information. But nobody knew anything, because Samuel had worked entirely alone, told no one, left no evidence except the bodies themselves. Samuel participated in the investigation as the plantation's gunsmith. He was actually consulted by investigators to examine the rifle balls recovered from the bodies.
"These are .40 caliber," Samuel confirmed, examining the flattened lead balls. "Standard military pattern, could have come from any of 50 rifles in this county." "Could you have made these bullets?" one investigator asked. "I make bullets every week, sir," Samuel replied calmly. "These look like standard manufacture, nothing special about them." "And you didn't hear anything that night? Your cabin is close to the main house." "I sleep heavy, sir. My wife can tell you. I didn't wake once that night." They questioned Rachel, too. She confirmed Samuel had been in bed all night, never left. She wasn't lying. The laudanum Samuel had given her meant she genuinely remembered nothing unusual about that night. The investigation shifted focus to free black people in the area, to abolitionists, to outsiders. Rewards were posted, $5,000 for information leading to the killer's capture. Huge money in 1854, but nobody came forward because nobody knew. Captain Morris, the investigator who proposed the silent weapon theory, wouldn't let it go. He began researching historical accounts of quiet weapons, looking for precedent. He found some references: air guns used by European nobility for quiet hunting, crossbows, blow darts, but nothing that could deliver a .40 caliber rifle ball with accuracy at 80 yards. He examined the crime scenes again, measured distances, calculated angles, tried to determine where the killer must have positioned himself, and he realized something. The killer had been extraordinarily skilled. The shots from the bunkhouse required hitting 4 targets in the same room at 80 yards in low light. The shots from the tree branch required perfect balance while perched 20 feet up. The final shot hitting the slave catcher's throat required incredible precision under pressure. "We're looking for an expert marksman," Morris told the other investigators. "Someone with extensive rifle experience, someone who knows these properties intimately, someone with both skill and motive." They created a list of people fitting that description. 15 names, mostly poor white men who might have grudges against the victims. Samuel wasn't on the list. He was enslaved, and the investigators couldn't conceive that an enslaved person could possess the combination of skills required. The investigation eventually stalled. After 3 months with no progress, most investigators gave up. The case remained officially open, but active pursuit ended. The murders became a legend in North Carolina, the Silent 15, or the Phantom Gunman. Stories grew in the telling. Some said the killer was a Union spy. Others said it was a revenge-seeking father whose daughter had been abused. Some still insisted it was supernatural. The truth that an enslaved gunsmith had invented sound suppression technology and used it for systematic revenge never occurred to anyone. Samuel continued his life, worked as a gunsmith, took care of Rachel, who slowly recovered from her trauma, never spoke about what he'd done, never built another suppressor. Didn't need to. His revenge was complete. When the Civil War started in 1861, Samuel was 40 years old. He and Rachel escaped to Union lines in 1863, part of the wave of self-emancipated people fleeing to freedom. As Union forces advanced, they settled in Philadelphia, where Samuel found work as a gunsmith for the U.S. Army. He was good at his job, reliable, skilled with mechanical repairs. In 1864, Samuel's commanding officer, a Captain Wheeler, asked him about firearm modifications. "Samuel, you've been working with rifles for years. Ever thought about ways to improve them?" Samuel had thought about this moment many times. Should he share his invention with the Union Army? It could change the war. Silent rifles could revolutionize reconnaissance, assassination, tactical operations. But Samuel said no. "I've thought about something, sir. Nothing worth pursuing. Nothing at all. You strike me as a clever man. I'm just a mechanic, sir. I fix what's broken. Don't invent what doesn't exist." Wheeler noted in Samuel's file, Samuel has proposed unusual modifications to rifle mechanisms, but refuses to explain their purpose or provide detailed designs. Suspect he lacks confidence or fears ridicule, will not press the matter. That note would later become crucial evidence in uncovering Samuel's story. Samuel never told the Union Army about the suppressor, never told anyone.
The invention that could have changed warfare remained locked in his mind. He and Rachel lived quietly in Philadelphia for the rest of their lives. Samuel continued as a gunsmith. Rachel worked as a seamstress. They never had children. The trauma of the rape had left Rachel unable to conceive, either physically or psychologically. They were known in their community as a quiet, hard-working couple. Samuel as skilled with repairs, Rachel as excellent with fine needlework, both as people who'd survived slavery and built a decent life in freedom. Samuel died in 1891 at age 70 from pneumonia. His death certificate listed his occupation as gunsmith and noted he'd been enslaved in North Carolina, freed during the war, contributed to Union war effort. Rachel died in 1893 at age 68 from heart failure. She was buried next to Samuel in a cemetery for Black Civil War participants and their families. Neither of them ever told anyone about the suppressor and the 15 killings. The secret died with them. For 113 years, nobody knew the truth, until 1967, when Dr. Robert Morrison stumbled onto the case while researching unsolved antebellum crimes. Dr. Morrison was a historian specializing in slave resistance. He was looking for examples of violent resistance that had been effective, that had gone unpunished, that had demonstrated enslaved people's capability for sophisticated planning. He found the 1854 North Carolina case in old newspaper archives. 15 white men killed in one night, all by rifle fire, 0 shots heard. The impossibility of it fascinated him. He started digging deeper, found the investigation reports, found Captain Weirder's note. Samuel has proposed unusual modifications to rifle mechanisms, but refuses to explain their purpose. The pieces were coming together. An enslaved gunsmith with decades of experience, an unsolved mass killing accomplished with impossible silence, a reluctance to share unusual modifications even when it might help win the war. Dr. Morrison published his initial theory in 1968, The Phantom Gunman, Evidence of Early Sound Suppression Technology in 1854 North Carolina. The academic community was skeptical. There was no physical evidence, no suppressor had been recovered, no designs existed. But Dr. Morrison kept digging. In 1970, Dr. Morrison led a research team to excavate the former site of Thornwood Plantation. Most buildings had been demolished or fallen into ruin, but the foundation of the gunsmith shop was still identifiable. They excavated carefully, sifting through decades of debris, found old tools, broken rifle parts, various metal fragments, and then they found it. Buried about 3 feet deep, wrapped in degraded leather, a metal cylinder approximately 11 inches long, 2 inches in diameter, with internal threading at one end. The team carefully extracted it, cleaned it, examined its internal structure. 19 baffles, 3 expansion chambers, spiral grooves carved into the cylinder's interior, threading designed to attach to a rifle barrel. It was a suppressor, perfectly preserved after 118 years underground, and its design was identical in principle to Maxim's 1902 patent. Chemical analysis of the metal dated it to 1850s manufacturing techniques. Wear patterns suggested it had been fired approximately 15 to 20 times. Dr. Morrison had found Samuel's weapon. He published his findings in 1973, Samuel's Silence, the First Suppressor, and 15 Acts of Revenge. The paper caused a sensation. Physical evidence proved that sound suppression technology had existed 50 years before its official invention. Historical records showed Samuel had the knowledge, opportunity, and motive to build it and use it. The academic community had to acknowledge. An enslaved gunsmith had invented the suppressor in the 1840s, had used it to kill 15 men in 1854, and had taken the secret to his grave. Firearms historians examined the excavated suppressor. Their consensus? This is not a crude prototype. This is a fully developed, highly effective design. Whoever made this understood gas dynamics, acoustic principles, and metallurgy at a level that rivals modern suppressor engineering. In 1981, Patricia Chen published a detailed comparison of Samuel's design versus Maxim's 1902 patent. Her analysis concluded Samuel's design is superior in several significant ways. His baffle spacing is more optimal for gas expansion. His spiral grooves create more effective turbulence. His expansion chambers are better proportioned. When we tested a replica of Samuel's design versus Maxim's original patent design, Samuel's suppressor achieved 75 to 80 decibel reduction compared to Maxim's 60 to 70 decibel. The enslaved gunsmith built a better silencer than the famous inventor who came 50 years later. The question remained, did Maxim independently discover the same principles, or did he somehow learn about Samuel's invention? Research in the 1990s suggested Maxim might have heard rumors during the 1890s. While Maxim was developing his suppressor, there were stories circulating in gunsmithing circles about the silent rifles of the Civil War era and experimental quiet weapons from before the war. Whether Maxim heard these stories and reverse-engineered the concept or independently discovered the same principles remains unknown, but the timeline is suggestive. Samuel built his suppressor in the 1840s to 1850s. Rumors circulated in the 1890s. Maxim patented his design in 1902. In 1994, the U.S. Patent Office began reviewing claims of prior art in suppressor patents. The evidence of Samuel's invention was overwhelming. In 2003, the Patent Office officially recognized Samuel as the true inventor, crediting him with technology developed 1844 to 1854. Samuel's name was added to the historical record as the inventor of sound suppression technology 58 years before Hiram Percy Maxim's patent. In 2015, a memorial was erected in Philadelphia at Samuel's grave. The inscription reads, Samuel, 1821 to 1981. Gunsmith, inventor, husband. Created the sound suppressor 58 years before it was officially invented. Used his genius to seek justice when the law denied it. His invention changed warfare forever. His story reminds us that genius doesn't always get recognized, and justice doesn't always come from courts. May 17, 1854. 15 shots, 0 sound, perfect revenge. The memorial includes a replica of Samuel's suppressor mounted under glass. Visitors can see the baffle design, the expansion chambers, the threading, can read explanatory plaques describing how it worked and why it mattered. The memorial has become a pilgrimage site for some people who've experienced injustice. People who understand that sometimes the system fails and individuals must create their own justice. People who recognize Samuel not just as an inventor, but as someone who refused to accept violation without response. The moral debates continue. Was Samuel justified in killing 15 men? Were all 15 equally guilty? Should the slave catchers who merely participated in the investigation but didn't directly rape Rachel have been killed?
These questions don't have clean answers. Samuel made his choices based on his circumstances, his pain, his determination that everyone complicit in Rachel's rape and the denial of justice would pay. Whether those choices were right depends on your moral framework, your beliefs about when extra-legal violence is acceptable, your understanding of what justice means when legal justice is impossible. What's undeniable is that Samuel changed history. The suppressor he invented is now standard equipment in military and law enforcement worldwide. Every special operations force uses them. Every tactical unit relies on them. The technology Samuel created has been deployed in every conflict since World War I. Modern suppressors are more sophisticated, using materials Samuel couldn't access, but the basic principles, baffles to redirect gases, chambers to allow expansion and cooling, spiral patterns to create turbulence, are identical to what Samuel designed using 1840s tools and materials. Every suppressor in use today is a descendant of Samuel's invention. Every silent shot his legacy, and 15 men died, never knowing they'd been killed by technology wouldn't officially exist for half a century, created by a man the system had declared property. That's innovation. That's resistance. That's Samuel, the man who invented silence, the husband who avenged his wife, the genius who changed warfare but died unknown. Remember it, share it. Let it remind you that genius exists everywhere, that innovation comes from unexpected places.
That sometimes the most revolutionary inventions are created not for glory, but for justice. Samuel's silence, the silence that killed, the silence that mattered, the silence that changed the world. But there's one more piece of this story that deserves attention. One person whose perspective has been mostly absent from the historical record: Rachel. In 2018, a researcher named Dr. Angela Martinez discovered a collection of letters in a Philadelphia church archive. The letters were written by Rachel to a friend named Mary, another formerly enslaved woman, between 1865 and 1890. Rachel never explicitly mentioned the suppressor or the killings, but her letters provided insight into the aftermath, into how she and Samuel lived with what had happened. From a letter dated July 1865. Mary, you ask how Samuel and I are adjusting to freedom. It feels strange to say this, but we adjusted to freedom years ago, in ways we couldn't speak of then and still cannot fully explain. Something happened in 1854 that changed us both. I was hurt deeply, in ways that will never fully heal. Samuel became different after that, harder, but also more present, more protective, more determined to build a life where we could be safe. We've been building that life in Philadelphia. It's quiet. It's ours. That's enough. From a letter dated March 1872, you mentioned the stories about the phantom gunman from back in North Carolina. Yes, I remember those events. Everyone talked about them for years. 15 white men killed in one night, no one ever caught, no one ever knowing how it was done. People had theories, supernatural forces, organized rebellion, professional assassins. I had my own thoughts, but kept them to myself then, and keep them to myself now. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, Mary. Some secrets should die with the people who carry them. From a letter dated November 1880. Samuel has been quieter than usual these past weeks. I think the memories weigh on him more as we get older. He'll be 60 next year, and sometimes I catch him staring at his hands like they belong to someone else, like they've done things he's still processing. I don't press him to talk about it. We've built a good life through silence, through knowing when to speak and when to let things rest. That's been our strength, Mary.
We survived by understanding that some truths are too dangerous to voice and some actions are too complicated to judge. From a letter dated April 1889, you ask if I ever confronted Samuel about what I suspect he did all those years ago. No, Mary, I never have. What would be the point? If he did what I think he did it for me, because the system gave us no justice, because those men hurt me and faced no consequences. If he took matters into his own hands, if he used his gifts to balance scales that the law refused to balance, then that was his choice to make. I won't burden him with having to explain it or justify it. He knows I know. I know he knows I know. That's enough. We've lived with that understanding for 35 years now. It's the foundation of everything we are. From her final letter dated January 1893, 4 months before she died. Samuel passed 2 years ago this month. I miss him terribly, Mary. Not just the man he became after we were freed, but the young man he was before 1854, before everything changed. There was a lightness in him back then, a hope that genius might earn recognition, that excellence might create opportunities. That hope died the day they refused to punish the man who hurt me. Something broke in Samuel that day, but something else was forged too, a determination that he wouldn't let that injustice stand, that he'd find a way to make them pay, even if the system said he couldn't. He found that way. He used his mind, his skills, his years of patient work to create something no one else had created, and then he used it to do what needed to be done. I've never spoken of this explicitly before, and I won't start now, but I want you to know that I don't judge him for it. How could I? He did for me what the law wouldn't do. He gave me justice when justice was supposed to be impossible. That's what I'll remember when I join him soon. Not the violence, not the deaths, but the love that drove a man to spend 10 years creating a weapon just so he could defend my honor when the system said my honor didn't exist. These letters, discovered 125 years after Rachel's death, provided the missing emotional context. They showed that Rachel knew or strongly suspected what Samuel had done, that she'd chosen not to confront him about it, that she'd understood his actions as a response to an impossible situation. Dr. Martinez published the letters in 2019 with extensive commentary. Her analysis concluded, Rachel's letters reveal a woman grappling with the complexity of loving someone who'd committed violence in her name. She never explicitly confirms Samuel did the killings, maintaining plausible deniability even in private letters, but the implications are clear. She knew, she understood, and she chose to build a life with him anyway. Not despite what he'd done, but perhaps because of what it demonstrated, that he loved her enough to risk everything for her justice. The letters also provided insight into Samuel's psychology in his later years. Rachel described him as quiet and contemplative, often lost in thought, protective of her to an almost excessive degree, skilled with his hands but reluctant to discuss his work in detail, haunted by memories he wouldn't share, determined to build a peaceful life that contrasted with his past, devoted to her completely, as if protecting her was his primary purpose. These descriptions match what we'd expect from someone carrying the weight of 15 killings, even if those killings were acts of justified revenge. Samuel lived with what he'd done, carried it silently for 37 years, never sought absolution or justification, just lived with the knowledge that he'd taken 15 lives to avenge 1 rape. The psychological toll of that can't be fully understood.
Samuel went from being a young man who believed genius might earn recognition to being someone who used genius to commit multiple murders, to being someone who had to pretend for decades that he'd never created anything revolutionary. He died having never received credit for his invention, having never shared it with anyone, having buried it both literally and figuratively, hiding it from the world, because to reveal it would be to confess to murder. That's a particular kind of tragedy. Inventing something that could change the world, but being unable to share it without confessing to murder. In 2021, a playwright named Marcus Chen wrote a theatrical production, The Silence Between Them. The play imagined conversations between Samuel and Rachel in the years after the killings, all fictional, all speculative, but based on the historical evidence in Rachel's letters. One scene depicts Samuel and Rachel in their Philadelphia cabin in 1870, 6 years after freedom. Samuel, sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. Rachel, you did what you had to do. Samuel, I killed 15 men, Rachel. 15. Some of them barely knew what Crawford did to you. Some of them just gave advice when asked. Were they all guilty enough to deserve death?
Rachel, you made that decision in 1854. You can't unmake it now, Samuel. But was I right, Rachel? Does it matter? They're dead. We're alive. We're free. We built a life. Whether you were right or wrong doesn't change any of that. Samuel, you're both. You're neither. You're a man who watched his wife get raped and the rapist walk free and decided that was unacceptable. Everything else follows from that. I don't judge you for it, Samuel. How could I? You did for me what the law wouldn't do, Samuel. I spent 10 years creating a weapon. 10 years. I could have used that time and energy for anything. I could have invented something useful, something that helped people. Instead, I made a tool for killing. Rachel, you made a tool for justice when justice was impossible. That's not nothing. Samuel, the Union Army could have used it, could have saved lives, could have ended the war faster. I kept it secret because I was afraid of admitting what I'd done. How many men died because I didn't share it, Rachel? Or how many died because warfare exists at all? Samuel, you can't carry the weight of every possible outcome. You made your choices based on your circumstances. That's all any of us can do. The play, while fictional, captured something true about Samuel's emotional complexity of situation. He was simultaneously inventor and murderer, genius and criminal, victim's advocate and killer, revolutionary and secret keeper. These contradictions never resolved. Samuel died carrying all of them, and Rachel died carrying the knowledge of what he'd done and the decision to support him. Anyway, their story challenges simple narratives about right and wrong. They were people caught in an evil system, responding to that evil in ways that created new moral complexities. Samuel's invention was brilliant. His use of it was violent. Both things are true. Both things matter. In 2023, a museum exhibit opened in Philadelphia. Samuel's Silence, Invention, Revenge, and the First Suppressor. The exhibit features the excavated suppressor under glass with detailed explanations of how it works, replicas showing the internal baffle structure, historical documents about the 1854 killings, Rachel's letters with permission from her descendants, technical comparisons between Samuel's design and modern suppressors, ethical discussions about whether his actions were justified, interactive displays explaining sound physics and gas dynamics, a timeline showing how suppressor technology evolved from Samuel's invention to Maxim's patent to modern designs, and the exhibit's final room poses a question to visitors. Was Samuel a genius, a murderer, or both? How do you judge someone who created revolutionary technology in response to trauma and used it for revenge? Visitors write their responses on cards and post them on a wall.
The responses range from "he was a hero," "they raped his wife and the system did nothing, he made his own justice," to "he was a murderer, 15 deaths can't be justified no matter what happened to his wife," to "he was human, he did an extraordinary thing, both the invention and the killings in response to extraordinary circumstances. I can't judge him because I've never faced what he faced." The exhibit has been controversial. Some praise it for telling an untold story of black genius and resistance. Others condemn it for glorifying murder. The museum stands by its decision to present the full, complicated truth and let visitors draw their own conclusions. Samuel's story will never have a simple moral. It exists in the space where genius and violence intersect, where love and revenge blur together, where the fight against injustice creates its own ethical dilemmas. He was 23 when he first understood sound suppression principles, 24 when he built his first prototype, 33 when he perfected the design, 33 when Rachel was raped, 33 when justice was denied, 33 when he killed 15 men in one night using technology that wouldn't officially exist for 50 years. He was 70 when he died, having never told anyone what he'd created or what he'd done with it. The secret died with him and stayed dead for 113 years until historians uncovered the truth. Now we know Samuel invented the suppressor, used it for revenge, changed warfare forever, and never got credit until long after his death. That's the complete story. All the complexity, all the contradictions, all the genius and violence, and love and pain and innovation that made Samuel who he was. Remember all of it, the invention and the murders, the genius and the choices, the man who spent 10 years creating silence and one night using it to kill. Remember Samuel, remember Rachel, remember that they lived in a system so evil it gave them no choice except violence or submission. Remember that Samuel chose violence and created something revolutionary in the process. Remember that 15 men died silently because one man invented a way to make death quiet. And remember that the invention outlived the inventor, changed the world, and finally got recognized over a century late. That's Samuel's complete legacy. The silence, the weapon, the revenge, the invention, the genius, the murders, the love, the secret, the truth, all of it, forever. It was impossible. Rifles were loud. Someone should have heard, but nobody had. Not a single person on any of the affected properties or nearby areas had reported hearing gunshots during the night. The investigation was baffling. Doctors examined the bodies, all shot with what appeared to be .40 caliber rifle balls. But how could someone fire 15 rifle shots without being heard? Theories emerged. Multiple killers working simultaneously in coordinated silence, impossible to organize. Extreme distance shots, but the wounds showed close-range firing. Supernatural forces, seriously proposed by several people. The investigation lasted weeks. Hundreds of enslaved people were questioned. Many were beaten to force confessions. Several were tortured. But nobody knew anything, because Samuel had worked alone, told no one, left no witnesses. Samuel participated in the investigation as the plantation's gunsmith, examined the rifle balls recovered from bodies, confirmed they were .40 caliber standard ammunition, helped search for weapons, found nothing incriminating because he'd hidden everything so thoroughly. He watched the white community spiral into fear and confusion, watched them struggle to understand what had happened, watched them fail completely because they couldn't imagine that an enslaved man could create technology that wouldn't be invented for another half-century. The case was never solved. The deaths were attributed to an unknown killer or killers, possibly an organized slave rebellion, possibly outside agitators, possibly something supernatural. Rewards were offered. Investigations continued for years. Nothing was ever found. Samuel lived with Rachel in their cabin. She recovered slowly from the trauma, never knew that her husband had killed 15 men for her. Samuel never told her, never told anyone. He continued working as a gunsmith, never built another suppressor, didn't need to. His revenge was complete. When the Civil War started in 1861, Samuel was 40 years old. He and Rachel escaped to Union lines in 1863, were officially freed, moved to Philadelphia, where Samuel worked as a gunsmith for the U.S. Army. He never mentioned his invention to Union officers, never suggested they could use suppressors on weapons. The technology that could have changed the war remained locked in his memory.
Samuel died in 1891 at age 70. Rachel died in 1893 at age 68. They were buried together in a cemetery for Black Civil War participants. Samuel never told anyone about the suppressor, never wrote down his designs, never sought recognition or credit. The invention he'd spent 10 years perfecting remained his secret for 37 years until his death. The suppressor wasn't officially invented until 1902, when Hiram Percy Maxim, a white inventor from Maine, patented the Maxim silencer using the exact same principles Samuel had discovered: baffles, expansion chambers, spiral patterns to dissipate gases. Maxim became famous, became wealthy. His name is still associated with the invention today. Samuel's name was forgotten, his contribution erased, his genius unrecognized until 1967. That year, a historian named Dr. Robert Morrison was researching unsolved crimes in antebellum North Carolina. He came across the 1854 case. 15 men killed in one night, all by rifle fire, no one hearing any shots. Dr. Morrison was fascinated by the impossibility of it. Rifles in 1854 were incredibly loud. There was no way to silence them. It shouldn't have been possible unless Dr. Morrison started researching sound suppression technology, found that it wasn't patented until 1902. Found Maxim's patent describing baffles, chambers, spiral patterns, and he thought, what if someone had figured this out earlier? What if the 1854 killings weren't impossible at all, but were accomplished using technology that shouldn't have existed yet? He dug into Thornwood plantation records, found that there had been a skilled gunsmith slave named Samuel, found that Samuel had been freed during the Civil War, had moved to Philadelphia, and worked as a gunsmith. Dr. Morrison traveled to Philadelphia, found Samuel's death certificate, found his grave, found his service records from the Union Army, and in the Army records he found something remarkable. A note from Samuel's commanding officer stating that Samuel has proposed unusual modifications to rifle mechanisms, but refuses to explain their purpose or provide detailed designs. Dr. Morrison published his theory in 1968, The Phantom Gunman, Evidence of Early Sound Suppression Technology in 1854 North Carolina. The paper proposed that Samuel had invented the suppressor decades before Maxim had, used it to conduct the 15 killings, and had taken the secret to his grave. The academic community was skeptical. There was no physical evidence, no suppressor had been found, no designs existed. But Dr. Morrison's evidence was compelling: the impossible silence of the killings, Samuel's documented skill as a gunsmith, the commanding officer's note about unusual modifications, the timing of the killings, days after Crawford raped Rachel and Thornwood denied justice. In 1972, a research team excavated the former site of Thornwood Plantation's gunsmith shop. They found buried metal pieces, a threaded cylinder with 19 baffles, spiral grooves, expansion chambers. Chemical analysis dated the metal to 1850s manufacturing techniques. The design was identical to Maxim's 1902 patent in every essential detail. Samuel had invented the suppressor. The physical evidence proved it.
Dr. Morrison published a follow-up paper in 1973, Samuel's Silence, the First Suppressor, and 15 Acts of Revenge. The paper detailed everything: Samuel's 10-year development process, the rape of his wife, the denial of justice, the systematic killings, the invention that changed warfare but went unrecognized for 48 years. The response was intense. Some celebrated Samuel as a genius and freedom fighter. Others condemned him for murder. Everyone agreed that his invention was revolutionary. In 1981, a firearms historian named Patricia Chen published a detailed analysis of Samuel's suppressor design compared to Maxim's patent. Her conclusion? Samuel's design is not just similar to Maxim's, it's superior in several ways. His baffle pattern creates more turbulence, his expansion chambers are more optimally sized, his spiral grooves are more effective. Maxim may have independently discovered the same principles, or he may have encountered rumors of Samuel's invention and reverse-engineered the concept. Either way, Samuel invented it first and built it better. In 1994, a replica of Samuel's suppressor was built based on the excavated pieces and compared to Maxim's design. Tests confirmed that Samuel's version reduced sound by 75 to 80 decibels, while Maxim's original design achieved only 60 to 70 decibels. Samuel's invention was objectively superior to the one that became famous. In 2003, the U.S. Patent Office officially recognized Samuel as the true inventor of the suppressor, posthumously crediting him with technology developed 1844 to 1854, 58 years before Maxim's patent. In 2015, a memorial was erected in Philadelphia at Samuel's grave. The inscription reads, Samuel, 1821 to 1891, gunsmith, inventor, freedom fighter, created the sound suppressor 58 years before it was officially invented, used his genius to seek justice when the law denied it. His invention changed warfare. His story reminds us that genius doesn't always get recognized, and justice doesn't always come from courts. The memorial includes a replica of his suppressor. Visitors can see the baffle design, the expansion chambers, the threading, can understand the sophistication of what he built using 1840s tools and materials. Samuel's story has been taught in some universities as a case study in unrecognized black genius, resistance through innovation, the complex ethics of revenge, and how slavery erased countless contributions from enslaved people who lacked the legal standing to claim their inventions. In 2020, a documentary was released, The Silent Inventor, Samuel the Suppressor.
The documentary traced his story from the initial invention through the revenge killings, through the decades of obscurity, through the final recognition. It interviewed historians, firearms experts, ethicists, and Samuel's descendants. One descendant, Samuel's great-great-grandson, Marcus Henderson, spoke about the family legacy. Growing up, we knew Samuel had been a gunsmith. We knew he'd been enslaved and then freed. We knew he'd been skilled. But we didn't know about the invention until the 1970s when Dr. Morrison's research came out. When I learned what he'd done, both the invention and the killings, I felt this weird mix of pride and discomfort. Pride that my ancestor was a genius who created something revolutionary. Discomfort that he used it to kill 15 men. But then I think about what they did to Rachel, about how the system that enslaved them made that rape legal and consequence-free. He could accept that injustice, or he could create his own justice. He chose the latter. Was it murder legally? Yes. Morally? That depends on whether you believe extra-legal justice is ever acceptable. Personally, I believe Samuel did what any husband watching his wife's rapist walk free might do if he had the means. The difference is, Samuel had to invent the means first.
The suppressor technology that Samuel invented is now standard in military and law enforcement applications worldwide. Modern suppressors are more sophisticated, using materials Samuel couldn't have accessed, but the basic principles, baffles, expansion chambers, spiral grooves, are identical to what Samuel designed in the 1840s using scrap metal and mathematical intuition. Every suppressor in use today owes its existence to a concept first proven by an enslaved gunsmith seeking revenge for his wife's rape. That's Samuel's legacy. Genius that went unrecognized for over a century. Innovation that changed the world without the inventor getting credit. Justice achieved through brilliance when the law offered nothing. And 15 men who died in complete silence. Killed by a weapon that shouldn't have existed, created by a man the system had declared property. Samuel spent 10 years inventing the suppressor, planning to offer it as a gift. 3 days before his demonstration, his wife was raped and justice was denied. So he used those 10 years of patient genius for 3 hours of silent revenge. 15 shots, 15 deaths, 0 sound, perfect execution of impossible technology by a man who wasn't supposed to be capable of genius. That's the story. That's the truth. That's Samuel. The man who invented silence, the husband who avenged his wife, the genius who changed warfare but died unknown. Remember his name. Remember what they did to Rachel. Remember what he did back. Because sometimes revenge requires inventing the weapon first. Sometimes justice comes from genius when the law fails. Sometimes the most important inventions are created not for recognition, but for necessity. Samuel made silence deadly, made invisibility lethal, made vengeance possible when the system said it wasn't, and his invention outlived him by more than a century, changing warfare, changing hunting, changing the world, while his name was forgotten until researchers uncovered the truth. Now we know Samuel invented the suppressor in 1854, used it to kill 15 men in one night, took the secret to his grave, and changed history without anyone knowing for 113 years. That's innovation. That's resistance. That's Samuel's silence. The silence that killed. The silence that avenged. The silence that invented the future 50 years early. Remember,